Hello, it's Reija and welcome to another video. Today I will be sharing with you my October reading wrap-up. I read a bunch of things in October. I had an excellent reading month, and for once I think making a TBR actually helped me and helped me be accountable and everything. So yeah, I might do that for the foreseeable future. So without further ado, let's get started with wrapping up all of these hecking books. Starting with the first book that I read in October, or I should say finished in October, because I did start reading A Taste of Golden Iron in September. And I made a full review, or rather 5 reasons to read video of this book, where I focused mostly on all of the things that I found to be positive aspects on this book, which was, for me, the romance, the world building, the anxiety representation. And I will say that this was not a 5-star read for me. I gave it 4 stars. There are some things in this book that personally were not turn-offs for me, but I know that for some other people, this book might have some issues. For example, Alexandra Rowland takes heavily inspiration from the Ottoman and Turkish empires, and also like southern Europe in order to like create this secondary world. And the points of views, like the main characters in this story, are all either working for the imperial family or part of the imperial family. Therefore, it has very like pro-empire views. So, and those are not particularly challenged. I will say that Alexandra Rowland's work tends to be all set in the same shared like universe. So I wonder if they are going to be sort of exploring this topic from another lens with their other characters from other settings set in the same world, because I feel like it makes sense for these characters to be sort of like pro-empire in this context. But I will wait on judging the whole world and that aspect of the world building any further until I have read their other books, because it might be that they are actually addressing these topics and the sort of like pro-imperial stance and the views of this empire in particular as it relates to the other parts of the world in their other work. That is pretty much my main critique, is that this doesn't really challenge the sort of pro-imperial tones of the narrative. But I really enjoyed it as a fantasy romance, and that is why it is one of my favorite books of the year. The next thing I read during the month of October, I should have read actually in September, but I didn't have the time, so I finished it just in the nick of time in order to do my Shorts and Sorcery live show, and that is the Future Science Fiction Digest issue 15. This was the September book club pick for the Shorts and Sorcery book club, and I really enjoyed this magazine. I'm planning on keeping tabs on this magazine going forward. I really liked most of these stories, and pretty much most of them were from countries where I have not really explored much fiction before, like Ukraine and Greece. So that was really fantastic for me, and I made a full live show discussion about this issue. So if you would want to check that out and check this issue out, I will leave those resources in the cards above. Then I read Silver in the Wood and Drowned Country by Emily Tesh. These are short novellas that form a duology, and it follows this legend of the Green Man, of this sort of like a demigod type figure, or like a demi-spirit, who is connected and linked to this large, like, old ancient forest, and sort of like is in communion with the forest, and has these magical abilities and can sort of move in time with the forest, in time with the trees, so they have an expanded life cycle and etc. So the first part of the story, the first novella, Silver in the Wood, follows Tobias Finch, who is the Green Man of the Woods, and he is the main point of view character, or rather the only point of view character. And it follows his relationship with this young man called Silver, who becomes his sort of like landlord, essentially, even though Tobias hasn't really been paying rent because he's been alive, for like hundreds of years, etc. And there's this sort of like ominous demonic presence in the wood that appears every year that has connections to Tobias's past. And it also has some like romance and stuff. I really enjoyed this. This had really like ethereal, atmospheric prose. It was very like creepy, but also cozy. I really enjoyed this. This was my favorite of the two because I generally just preferred Tobias as the point of view character. In the second novella, we switched to Silver as the point of view character, and I did not like Silver as much. Silver can be really obnoxious, actually, and like selfish, and that is actually acknowledged by the text. But also, Silver doesn't really grow out of that obnoxiousness. Like, he does this really awful thing, and he is not apologetic about it. He full on the page says that he would do that shitty thing again. He just did not want to get caught. And I don't mind reading about sort of morally grey or obnoxious characters. Like, I have read multiple books where that I really loved, where the main character is an asshole. But going from Tobias's point of view, and Tobias being like this super gentle giant and like really cozy and cute and wonderful, and then have the narrative focus on Silver, and the bad thing that he did was to Tobias. So it's like, it's really hard to root for him. I still gave this like 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, but like I had a harder time getting into the story because like I was so fed up with Silver's antics for most of the time. So yeah, I wish this book had more Tobias in it. But I really enjoyed Emily Tesh's writing, and I would really want to read more from them. So this was really good. And then I read Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake, and I really enjoyed this story. This was the perfect, cozy, sapphic romance with just enough high stakes without becoming like anxiety-inducing. Like sometimes when you have like really sort of like toxic dynamics in a romance, it can really give me anxiety because I'm like, how am I gonna root for these people to get together? But here, the toxicity isn't actually between the main couple. There is some unresolved tension between the 2 main characters because when they were children, Delilah was kind of ostracized by Claire, who was part of Delilah's stepsister's friend group. So there is that like bitterness and tension between them because of what they were to each other as children, which was basically Claire was not necessarily a bully, but she sort of enabled Delilah to be bullied by her other friends. So they have that tension that they need to work through. But the actual like core sort of conflict and toxicity that needs to be dealt with in this book is between Delilah and her sister. And I found that to be really a sort of fantastic foil. Because Claire is also like Delilah's sister's like one of her best friends. So it makes sense that she would have this conflict of whose side is she really gonna be on. And I loved the tension between all of these characters. I liked that the like all of the characters had goals and aspirations outside of just the romance. Like Claire has this vision of like this bookstore that she has inherited from her like mother, that she wants to turn around and make into like this really cool modern book like indie bookstore, and it's great. And also Delilah is all about her photography, and like she is actually like pursuing her art on page in multiple instances during the story. I found that this was such a cool story, and it actually doesn't even fall into the trap of having an actual third act breakup. Like there is this argument and these characters kind of have a rift between them, but it doesn't feel like like an actual breakup because they sort of like weren't at that point yet. And I liked how it was dealt with. It didn't feel frustrating to read about it. It made sense. So yeah, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm really eager to read the other companion book that is coming out in this series soon. So yeah. And then I read Tomorrow's Parties, Tales from the Anthropocine, edited by Jonathan Strahan. I actually buddy read this with Rachel, and I quite enjoyed this. Obviously, there were some stories that I did not like as much, and others that I liked a heck of a lot more. I had a really good time discussing these stories with Rachel, and I just really liked the project of this collection of going through like these all sorts of sort of post-apocalyptic climate fiction stories featuring like modern technology and sort of like the spin of what these modern technologies could do. And yeah, my personal favorite story in this, I think, is going to end up being Can You Hear the Fungi Sing? By Chen Shifan, and also the story that was written by Sarah Gailey. Those two were my favorites. On hindsight, I really enjoyed them a lot. So yeah, and I am really happy that I read it, and I'm extra happy that I have been managing to read anthologies this year. So yeah, this was fantastic. I gave this 3.5 stars, which is good considering that 3 stars is usually my default rating for anthologies, considering that I usually do not love all of the stories, but yeah, this was great. Highly recommend. And then I read Bolero by Wyatt Kennedy and art by Luana Vecchio. This is a multiverse, universe-hopping story about a bisexual disaster called Dagger and her pursuit to repair this relationship that she had with Natasha that she wrecked, and that gets explored in this comic. And it is a story about navigating addiction and recovery from alcohol addiction. It was really interesting in terms of pacing, in terms of what the author chose to show about the character. Like, basically, the multiverse hopping is used as a tool to show how Dagny, or like Dagger, basically every time there's a problem, she escapes it, she jumps into another universe in order to avoid having to deal with said issue. And she makes some really awful decisions and is generally a very shitty person to be around because of her dependence on alcohol to get her through the day. And yeah, this was very hard to read in terms of the subject matter, but I also think that this had some really interesting takes. It does feel a little bit disjointed, and some characters feel a little bit shallow. This definitely feels like it's a debut work, where some more edits could have been done to make it a little bit more polished. In terms of the art, I will say that while I like that the main character has a romantic relationship with a trans woman, sometimes I felt like the art kind of focused a little too much on the titillating aspects of a trans woman's body and what that might look like, and that made me a little bit uncomfortable, especially since that wasn't done on any of the other characters. So that could have been dealt with a little bit more sensitivity, in my opinion. But on the other hand, the trans woman's body is never commented upon, she is never dead named, so it manages to avoid all these other harmful tropes that I often see when trans characters are depicted by non-trans authors. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I would recommend you reading it just because it is a story that really takes risks and tries to explore things in a new way. So yeah, really enjoyed this. And then I read High Times in the Low Parliament by Kelly Robson. And this is another story that has a really unlikable main character. But I actually really sort of enjoyed her. Like, she was really sassy, she was really self-deprecating, but also like she takes no shit from other people. She also has some really unfortunate coping mechanisms, and as does everyone else in this book. This novella basically has like continuous drug use and alcohol abuse in this story, because basically all of the characters in the story are in a situation where they might die soon. Because the parliament is essentially overseen by fairies, but controlled by people. And the fairies have decided that if the people can't get their shit together and actually run the parliament properly, they're gonna drown everyone. And yeah, that is basically what is happening in here. The main character is sort of forced to become a scribe at the parliament, just as it is having this huge crisis of like trust issues within like the parliamentary system. This book deals a lot about like representative politics, like what it means to be a politician, what it means to like have a voice, and how to basically use political power in order to get what you want. Those are themes in this story, and it was very humorous. It had a very like humor-filled, sort of like a dry, self-deprecating, sarcastic tone of humor in it, which might not be for everyone. Like if you are someone who especially doesn't consider like drug abuse and constant references to drugs and alcohol to be funny, you're not gonna enjoy this book. Because this book draws a lot of its humor from the fact these characters are basically doing mushrooms and having yeast parties and getting all these hallucinations and stuff. So if you have a problem with those things, you are not gonna enjoy this. Having said that, I actually really enjoyed this. It could have been a little bit more fleshed out. For example, I felt like the romantic interest of the main character was a complete and utter non-character. So I wasn't really rooting for that romance. And then the end resolution with that couple, which actually becomes a throuple, feels very unearned. So yeah. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I liked it for the most part. And then the ending left a little something to be desired. But other than that, I quite enjoyed this. And then the final thing that I read in the month of October is This All Come Back. This is a speculative fiction anthology edited by Mykaela Saunders, and it features all of these stories by Indigenous Australian Aborigine creators. So all of the authors, the cover designer, the artist and editor, all of them are Indigenous, and it is published by an Indigenous press as well. So this was really interesting. I am actually going to be hosting a full live show discussion next Saturday on November 12th at 9 p.m. Finnish time. If you would want to see me talk about this at length, I am anticipating around 30 to 40 minutes to go over all of the things that I want to discuss about this anthology. But I actually quite enjoyed this. There were definitely some stories that weren't my jam, and this anthology also has a lot of like excerpts from longer stories, like actual novels, that I felt like those weren't necessarily a good thing to have in an anthology. It should have been just focused on actual short fiction, because it really shows that those stories were not meant to be short works. So they kind of pulled this collection down for me a little bit. But I actually really enjoyed this. This collection has a lot of stories that deal with non-linear narratives and sort of like have interesting views on time as a concept. So I gave this 3 stars. I would recommend people read it, and if you want to hear more of my thoughts, look forward to the live show. And there you have it. Those were all of the things that I managed to read in the month of October. This was a huge month for me. I am really happy with my reading. And if you got this far, please leave me a galaxy or star emoji or something like that, because I read Bolero, which was all about multiverse hopping and universe hopping. So leave me a galaxy or star or a nebula emoji down in the comments so that I know that you were here. And I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye!